This is a collection of 3 of the most emotional betrayal stories from Reddit. Enjoy listening. Story number 1.
I met Dylan 3 years ago at a party at a friend's place. He wasn't the kind of person who grabs attention at first sight, not the tallest, not the loudest, but there was something in his eyes, something real. We both didn't like noisy crowds, so we ended up in the kitchen, just the 2 of us, talking about books, movies, and life. It felt easy. He was smart, kind, and, as I thought back then, genuine. 6 months later, we were living together. He worked remotely, and I was studying for my master's degree at the university. We had arguments, of course, who doesn't? But overall, everything seemed real and strong. Until one day, I started to notice that our relationship was changing. I was growing, building my career, making new friends, while he seemed stuck. We didn't have any common interests anymore. Sex became rare, and even our breakfasts together became awkward. At work, I met a guy whose presence made my heart race 3 times faster. Nothing happened between us. It couldn't, as long as I was in a relationship. I'm just not that kind of person. But I felt that I wanted to try, and that was already a sign for me that my relationship wasn't working anymore. So, I decided to talk to Dylan. I wanted to tell him that maybe we should take a break. I need to tell you something. He interrupted me before I could say a word. I have cancer. I froze. Everything inside me snapped. What? Lymphoma. The doctors couldn't give a clear prognosis. He didn't cry. He just calmly explained that a few months ago, he started having stomach pains. He went to the doctor, got tested, and then had a biopsy. The diagnosis was lymphoma. He didn't want to scare me, hoping it would turn out to be a mistake. But now it was confirmed. He had started treatment. I was devastated. I didn't even think about breaking up after those words. Everything inside me screamed, he's dying and you wanted to leave? It was a tough battle. I wanted to be there for him through every procedure, but he said he didn't want me to see him weak. He bravely communicated with the doctors and went through all the therapy on his own. I took care of him. I cooked, brought him basins when he felt nauseous. He said it was from the chemotherapy. I accompanied him to his treatments and then picked him up by taxi. He started shaving his head in advance, he said. He didn't want me to see his hair falling out in chunks. He became thinner and wore baggy clothes. It was terrifying. Mentally, it was unbearable for me. I just didn't know what to do. I wanted to tell my family, but he said he wasn't ready. He said he wanted to win and tell everyone the story of how he overcame it, so they would admire him, not pity him. I understood him. It was awful to think about how his parents would take the news. This was our battle. We were going through it together, secretly. But I did tell my grandmother and best friend. They didn't talk to his family, and I knew for sure they would never spill the secret. But at least I could express my feelings and cry with them, because I didn't want to show Dylan how shattered I was. He had to see optimism in my eyes. I knew that was very important. I must say, our relationship became much closer. The interest came back, or so I thought. I always wanted to be with him, to hug him. After all, I understood that there might not be many such moments left. Of course, I never said this to him. He needed a positive attitude. I went through all of this inside me, but sometimes I broke down and silently cried in my soul, under the sound of running water, so he wouldn't hear. We hardly had sex at that time. He said he didn't have the strength, and that after therapy, his libido had decreased. But once, just once, there was an emotional outburst. He cried, I cried, and that night, we were closer than we had been in the past 6 months. It felt like a breath of fresh air, as if we truly loved each other again, no matter what. And then, I found out I was pregnant. At first, denial. Then, panic. Then, the thought, he's dying, and I'm carrying his child. What if chemotherapy affected the baby? What if there are risks of genetic mutations? I know that during such treatment, sperm mobility sharply decreases and the likelihood of conception is extremely low. So, is this a miracle? Then I can't think about preventing the pregnancy. What's the best thing to do? What if we lose the battle with cancer? Then I'll be left alone with a child? But it will be his child, a memory of him. With all these whirlwinds of thoughts, I realized I had to tell Dylan. I couldn't make the decision alone. It wouldn't be fair. The next evening, I sat next to him on the couch. He was pale again, wrapped in a hoodie, holding a cup of tea. Dylan, I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant. He froze. We need to go to the clinic. Talk to the doctors. I'm worried about the baby, chemotherapy. It could have affected the DNA, the embryo. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there with his mouth open. And then he whispered, "I don't have cancer." The world collapsed. I looked at him, and my mind went blank. WH what? I don't have cancer. I made it all up. He started crying. Not theatrically, not dramatically, quietly, without sound, with his mouth open and a distorted face. I knew you wanted to leave. I saw how you looked at me, like you didn't love me anymore. So, I made it up. I thought if you stayed, maybe everything would come back to life. I didn't know what to do when you stayed. I didn't know how to get out of it. It went too far. You thought I would leave, he kept repeating. You were already like you weren't here. I didn't know how to make you stay. So, you decided to play at death? You made me believe I was losing you, just so you wouldn't lose me. I sat there, looking at the person I once loved, but now I was scared of him. He didn't hit me, didn't shout, didn't drink. But what he did was violence of another kind. The lie on which I built my victimhood turned out to be empty. And I'm pregnant. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood up and went to the bathroom, sat on the floor, hugging myself, and stayed silent. 2 days passed. I went to my friend's place. He hasn't written, or maybe he has, but I blocked him everywhere. Now I'm sitting on her couch, holding my hands on my stomach and trying to figure out what's next. How do I tell my mom that the father of my child is a liar who faked cancer so I wouldn't leave him? How do I explain this to my grandmother, who prayed for his health every week? How do I tell my friend, who brought him homemade pies to boost his immunity? And what will I say to my child when they one day ask, "Where's my dad?" I don't know. I'm just breathing, 1 minute at a time. Because right now it's all I can do. What I have now, my relationship fell apart. I have no home, and there's a baby on the way. Not a bad start, right? What to do now, I don't even know. God, please tell me I'm not the only one in this situation. Right now, it seems to me that no one in the world would manipulate such a terrible illness. I just can't wrap my head around how I missed the red flags. I feel so stupid. Even now, I'm ashamed to write this. But I just need to talk to someone outside, someone who doesn't hate Dylan after what he did, like my friend. I need a fresh perspective, and the wisdom to accept what's happening in my life right now.
Story number 2.
To be honest, I've read a lot of stories here about family secrets, and I've always been amazed by how a person, someone you've known your whole life, can turn out to be completely different from what you thought. I always assumed these stories were greatly exaggerated or that some key details were left out. Because it just couldn't be like that. These stories always seem to border on fantasy. And, moreover, I never thought anything like that could happen to me. Just like I couldn't imagine that the day that was supposed to be the happiest day of my life would turn everything I believed in upside down. My wedding was supposed to happen in a week. Tom and I had been preparing for it for a whole year, and everything was almost ready: the dress, the venue, the music, the guest list. We'd been together for 4 years, and he was the most reliable, calm, and loving person in my life. I'd dreamed of this moment since I was a little girl. My family supported us, especially my parents, who had been married for 30 years and always seemed to me the ideal of true love. Unfortunately, my dad didn't make it to this day. But I believed he was with me, watching over me. The day everything began, I went to my parents' house to get a few old books that I wanted to use in the decoration for the hall. My mom kept them in my dad's study, and knowing she wouldn't be home, I went up to the high shelves myself. When I pulled one of the volumes down, a thick envelope fell out of it. It was old, yellowed, with an address handwritten on it, and no stamp. It said, "For Michael. Only for you." Michael is my father. He passed away 2 years ago from cancer. We had all been grieving, and it was truly a huge loss for our family. That's why I didn't want to read someone else's letter, but something stirred inside me. There was something off about it. Something hidden. You know that feeling? Like someone quietly closed a door behind you. I unfolded it. Michael. Sometimes I think I'm going crazy when I think about those years. I never wanted to destroy your family. But you know, what was between us couldn't have been called fleeting. I'll always be grateful for those moments, for those words, for the tenderness. For the way you looked at me when you thought no one was watching. I'm not asking you to come back. And you should never have had to choose. But you should know, you have a daughter. She's 24 now. She looks so much like you, it's almost funny. And she has your eyes. I've never told anyone, and I won't. But I needed to tell you. Thank you for everything. For the best years of my life. Allison. My hands were shaking. 24 years. This means, this woman had her while my father was still married to my mom. And all this time, we had lived as the perfect family, taking Christmas photos, going on picnics, and having dinner together every Sunday. I felt something inside me crack. This wasn't just a lie, this was a whole parallel life. I didn't tell my mom I found the letter. At first, I thought maybe it was a joke. Maybe a fabrication? But I couldn't just forget. Moreover, I didn't know if my mom knew about this. My head exploded with thoughts. And all of this while I was already in the middle of wedding preparations. This was the last thing I needed. I literally didn't know what to do or how to feel about it. I went home and started searching on social media. Allison's name. The daughter's age. The city where my father once worked. I stayed up until 4 a.m. and finally stumbled upon a Facebook profile. A woman named Allison James, 50 years old, living in the suburbs. A few posts, almost nothing personal. But one photo made me freeze, the girl standing next to her at a birthday. The very daughter. She truly had my father's eyes. His chin. Even the dimple in her cheek, just like mine. I looked at her and felt envy? Anger? Fear? As if someone had run a knife through my whole life and said, "Now, try to put it back together." The next week, I couldn't sleep. I didn't tell Tom what I had found. I tried to act like usual, but it felt like I was playing a role. The night before the wedding, I finally told my mom. We sat in the kitchen, and I just laid the letter in front of her. She read it silently. At first, I thought she would scream, cry, but she just said, "I knew." The world crumbled completely. It turns out my mom found out about my dad's affair many years ago. She had received an anonymous letter with a photo of my dad with that woman. They had fought for a long time and he swore he had ended it. She took him back, but never forgave him. They lived together but weren't happy, they just pretended for my sake. "I didn't want you to grow up in a broken family," she said, and her voice had no emotion. Just exhaustion. What? How could they just hide this? How could I not notice anything? How could anyone pretend to be a perfect family for so many years? I must be missing something in life. In an instant, my mom seemed like a stranger to me. I left. I got in the car and drove to Tom. I woke him in the middle of the night. I told him everything. About the letter. About the sister. About my mom. He listened carefully, holding my hands. And then he said, "You don't have to pretend. The wedding can wait. But you have to find out the whole truth." On one hand, I knew I was letting Tom down, but on the other hand, I just couldn't leave it like this. I had to understand what was going on. I don't know if I did the right thing. I'm ready to bet that most of you wouldn't sacrifice your wedding for old family secrets. But at that moment, it seemed like I had no other choice. 2 days later, I went to see Allison. She lived in a cozy house with a garden. She came to the door and immediately knew who I was. "You, her," she whispered. Honestly, she turned out to be a very kind woman. I didn't expect to be able to talk to her without disdain. We talked for hours. She told me that my father was indeed part of her life, and yes, he knew about the daughter. He even met with her secretly a few times. But he always came back to the family. I found out she had been at the funeral. Secretly, away from the family. My mom and I were so overwhelmed with grief and despair that even if she had stood in the first row, we probably wouldn't have noticed her. My sister, Laura, didn't know who her father was. She only suspected. Allison didn't want to interfere in someone else's family. It felt like I didn't know my father at all. I had very conflicting feelings. On one hand, I didn't want to believe it all, on the other hand, I was angry at him. And there was another side where I didn't recognize him anymore. I asked to meet Laura. To my surprise, Allison agreed with pleasure. I thought about this a lot afterward. I probably would have done things differently in her place. It was the strangest meeting of my life. We were like two versions of the same life. I, in the right family, with Christmas, grandmas, and ice cream in the park. She, with one mother, no father, but feeling like something was always missing. We didn't become sisters that day. But we started talking. It seemed she didn't have any contempt for me. At least, she was friendly. Even too friendly. I was constantly looking for a catch. I told my mom I met with Allison and Laura. She was very surprised that I did it, but didn't comment negatively. It seemed like she had grown so tired of the lies that she was ready for any outcome in this story. My mom and I really grew distant. I no longer felt like I had a role model, my family, my support. Now, only Tom is my family. Though, even with him, I don't trust him completely. I've become very suspicious and distrustful. Sometimes, I think I could really use a few sessions with a therapist, because this story has clearly left a much deeper mark on me than I realize. 6 months have passed. Tom and I got married, but it was a completely different ceremony. Without the sparkle. Without family. Just the two of us. That's how I felt when I got home. Now, I sometimes meet with Laura. It's still strange. Sometimes, painful. But I understand that part of my life was a lie. And I want at least its continuation to be real. Yesterday, I got an invitation to Allison's birthday. It's a very strange feeling. It's as if they want me to become part of their family. Maybe they're happy to have a piece of their father with them. Well, that makes sense, he didn't lie to them. His bright memory is only tarnished for me.
Story number 3.
I want to share a story that has lived in my heart for the past 5 years, and I can't go a day without thinking about it. Have you ever realized, in one single moment, that your family is not at all what you've always thought it was? I went through this shock at the most vulnerable age, my teenage years. And to this day, I still feel the echoes of that stress in my body and mind. Right now, I'm working with a therapist. Yesterday, she suggested that I share this story with a larger audience. The bigger the audience, the better. I couldn't think of a better place than here. I'm not expecting support. Well, no, I'm lying. I do hope for it. But let's start from the beginning. I always thought of myself as a regular guy from a regular family. My parents loved me, supported me as much as they could, though they were probably stricter than my friends' parents. My mom constantly worried about every little thing. If I was 5 minutes late coming home, the panic calls would start. My dad was demanding to the smallest detail, especially when it came to school and success. You have to be the best, he would say, as if our very life depended on it. I got used to it. I thought, well, they're just like that. Parents come in all kinds of ways. But one evening, everything changed. I was 17 then. I got home earlier than expected after practice, the coach was sick, and the session was cancelled. The house was dark, with only the living room light on. I took off my sneakers and quietly headed upstairs to change, but I stopped on the stairs when I heard my parents talking. I would have left, honestly. I don't like eavesdropping. But my mother's words struck me like a knife. They were talking about how tough the week had been, how tired they were, and then, in the middle of it, I heard her say, "I just can't take it anymore. Every time I look at him, I see Tom." My father responded in a heavy, dull voice. "I see him too. But he's all we have left. I couldn't cope without him." My mom sniffled. "But it's wrong. He doesn't even know he wasn't supposed to exist." I froze. My hands were sweating. My heart was beating so loudly I thought they could hear it. "We tried, Jane. We tried to love him like our own, like he was our first," my father said. "But he will always be a replacement." I think there's no need to explain that I didn't know who Tom was. I immediately understood they were talking about me, but I still couldn't piece together everything I had just heard. Anyway, I couldn't listen anymore. I slowly backed away, cursing the creaky stairs, and slipped out through the back door into the garden. I spent the whole night sitting on the swing in the backyard, staring at the empty starry sky. At first, I thought I had misunderstood. Or that I was wrong about it. But then, strange things started surfacing. Why didn't we have any baby photos of me, only from when I was 3 or 4? Why was my birthday always celebrated in such a formal way, without much joy? Why did my mom cry every August 25th, the day they told me her friend had died long ago? And most importantly, why did I always feel like there was an invisible shadow in the house, like someone important had left, and I was a strange attempt to fill the emptiness? The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. When my parents went to the store, I started rummaging through the basement, the place no one usually bothered to check. Among old boxes of toys and books, I found a sealed photo album. On the cover was a golden plaque, "Thomas." I opened it. It was my reflection. A boy with slightly different features, but the same brown eyes. The same smile. Similar hair. But he was more perfect, as if someone had drawn a better version of me. In one picture, he was holding a cake with the words "Happy Birthday, Tom." 1997 inch written on it. The year I was born. But it wasn't me. At the end of the album, there was a faded newspaper clipping, "Tragic accident, 5-year-old boy dies on Highway 27. Thomas Wilson. Son of Jane and Michael Wilson. My parents." I felt my world crumble. Everything I thought was mine, home, family, love, was built on the ruins of someone else's tragedy. I wasn't their first desired child. I was their attempt to replace an irreparable loss. After that, I started noticing even more. How my mom sometimes called me Tom in her sleep. How my dad grimaced when I failed an exam or didn't meet their expectations. How in the attic, there was a children's room hole, frozen in time, perfectly clean, with a plaque reading Tom's room on the door. They hadn't erased him. They had just added me. I want you to understand, all these signs had been there before, but I never paid attention to them. But when this story surfaced, everything immediately came into my mind as if it had been lying in wait for its time. I couldn't bring myself to talk to them for a long time. But one evening, unable to take it any longer, I went into the living room. They were watching an old video, a farewell concert at school where I played the role of some tree. The laughter abruptly stopped when I stood in front of the TV. "Why have you never told me about Tom?" I asked. My mom flushed, her face went pale. My father tensed up like a spring. "We wanted to protect you," she whispered. "Protect? From what? From the truth?" My dad stood up. "You won't understand. You were our salvation. After the accident, we were dead inside. We wanted to bring back even a part of him." His voice cracked. "And then you came. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who loved you but not as you, as the shadow of someone else? I left home 2 months after that conversation. I rented a room in a different neighborhood and got a job after school. My parents and I rarely talked. They tried, called, texted, invited me to visit. But I couldn't. Every meeting reminded me that I was a replacement. That I was never the son they truly loved. Years passed. I went to college. Made friends, found my dream job. I built my life for myself, for the first time, not to fill someone else's empty heart. I'm 23 today. I love my life, I have everything I wanted to achieve by this age. But with my parents, we never became closer during this time. We only communicate through text messages on each other's birthdays. Recently, I received a letter from my mom. Inside the envelope was a photo of me as a baby. A real one. Apparently, they did take pictures, they just hid them, afraid to show them, afraid of losing me again. On the back was a trembling handwritten note. You weren't a replacement. You were our second chance at love. I stared at the photo for a long time. What should I say? How should I behave? I feel like, for the first time in all this time, I feel sorry for them, not for myself. And today, for the first time, I feel like I want to write a response letter.